Welcome to Lesson 2 of the Managing Successful Teams course of the Nonprofit Bootcamp e-learning series. By definition, community-based work brings together a diverse mix of people with various experiences, strengths, and perspectives. In its highest form, this mix of voices can work in successful harmony, drawing out the best from individual participants who generate new ideas together. Sometimes, however, unaligned voices can create conflict and confusion. It takes effective leadership to bring a group into harmony and avoid the chaos. Today's presenter is Amy Vasquez, principal of Amy Vasquez Consulting. For over 20 years, Amy has had a rich experience as a leader, fundraiser, and facilitator of organizations working for progressive change. Amy is particularly passionate about and experienced in changes in our food system. She has held national leadership positions in this sector, including the founding director of the Chefs Collaborative, the development director for Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture, and the interim executive director for the Organic Farming Research Foundation. Amy resides in Columbus, Ohio, where she manages the Produce Perks Columbus, part of Ohio's statewide farmers market incentive program, and volunteers for the Bexley's Farmers Market and the Franklin County Local Food Council. With that, I'm happy to hand it over to Amy.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everybody. As Andrew said, this is the second of 3 conversations in the bootcamp series called Managing Teams. And as a member of this network, you all know that community-based organizations are important drivers to food system change. So we do most of our work in teams. And this series is meant to sharpen our understanding of teams and our ability to work effectively together in them. Last week, we discussed the characteristics of teams, and this week we'll explore your personal leadership style and how that impacts how you show up on teams. And in our final conversation, we'll discuss some very specific practices that will make your teams more effective. Hopefully each of these lessons will leave you with exercises and tips you can apply right now in your day-to-day work. As Andrew said, we'll follow this with office hours, and hopefully that can get us talking to one another and providing the opportunity to learn those things together. So last week I explained how I use check-ins, usually by way of introducing everyone and asking a more personal or mission-based question rather than just the name and affiliation we often do at the start of a meeting. Obviously, it's meant to build relationships and trust by showing a fuller individual than would happen just by stating, those basic affiliations. And obviously, we're limited by time and technology in this format to do that kind of round robin. But I still think checking in, even if it's just with ourselves, is a great way to drop away the other things that we've been busy in all day and really be present in this webinar. Today, I'm going to start us off by reading a quick poem. It was given to me by a mentor and friend from my early days at Chefs Collaborative. And as you can see in this picture, it's pinned on the bulletin board above my desk. It's faded now, and I put several thumbtack holes in it, but it's still its message is still beloved. So this is Marge Percy's To Be of Use. The people I love best jump into work headfirst without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element. The black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is as common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust, but the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were meant to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. So as we begin today, I invite you to check in with yourself by thinking of an inspirational poem or quote or image. Maybe it's on your desk. Maybe it's framed by your bedside or tucked in the sun visor of your car. Think of how it motivates you as we explore our leadership styles and our work on teams today. And of course, you can also skip this exercise if it doesn't work for you. But I do ask that you close the other windows on your screen, turn off your phone, and join the ride for the next hour. So, jumping in. Today's agenda, we'll review some highlights from last week's conversation on the characteristics of teams, and then we'll move into today's lesson, talking about how self-awareness helps you create a culture of collaboration and innovation on your team. We'll review some self-assessments that are out there and what they can tell us, including a values exercise so that you know what it looks like to talk about your leadership style and what conscious leadership looks like for you. So, Teamwork Matters is the name of the last lesson, and this African proverb for me kind of brings into relief the kind of theme of, in fact, the whole series. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we know that complex systemic change, like our efforts to change the food system, demands the wider attention, stronger voices, and compound experience that teams offer. If we had the solutions individually, we wouldn't be working on this big issue together. So last week, we talked about how teams work together towards a common purpose. They're made up of unique and diverse individuals, that the complexity of the food system calls for teamwork, and that teams can have dynamics that you inherit, maybe a department or a board, or they can be something that you build from scratch. They can be multi-sector, multi-agency, or internal to your organization. Because of that mix of people and ideas and training and backgrounds, trust is essential for this group of individuals to come together, complement with one another, and collaborate. And fostering teamwork and building that trust is deliberate, intentional, and ongoing work. But it doesn't mean that power goes away, so pay attention to it. There's all kinds of power over, with, and for. And because of that, the idea of getting to shared work instead of a shared vision is one way to get going, build momentum, and establish beginning relationships with people that may be very different from you. And as a follow-up, you got an email earlier this week about the forum on the FSLN website where resources can be posted, the totems and taboos that the Wallace Center uses in their own work about how kind of guidelines and signposts for their work together is there. And I will be posting resources from last week, the books I referenced, and links to places for more information on this whole series. Included with that some specific exercises and activities for trust building, which were part of your questions and comments in the evaluation and part of the question and comments in our office hours. And I invite you to participate in this forum. Your experiences matter. We'll get into sharing some of that together in this week's office hours, but the forum is an ongoing place for you all to ask questions of one another and learn from one another. So getting into today's lesson. Our objective today is to better know yourself so you can better lead and participate on teams. Self-awareness helps you understand where you shine and how you work best together with others. And we will also discuss how this conscious leadership can lead to a culture of collaboration and innovation on teams. Last week, I referenced Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. And one of the main points in that book is this idea that who we are is how we lead. She goes on to say that self-love and self-awareness matter. And the greatest barrier to courageous leadership is not fear, It's how we respond to the fear. It's the armor, the thoughts, the emotions, and the behavior that we use to protect ourselves, that move us out of alignment with our values and corrode the trust that we've built with our colleagues and teams. It's the armor that prevents us from being our most courageous selves. So when we don't show up to our teams practicing the vulnerability that we talked about last week, Brown calls this embracing the suck of being vulnerable. When we put on the armor because we're out of our comfort zone, that's when we behave contrary to our values and trust starts to break down. I'll give you an example. I know that I demand excellence of myself and others. I value hard work. That poem I read in the beginning might have tipped you to that. And that means when I'm afraid of messing up or letting someone down or not getting something right, I often forge ahead alone, and then I miss opportunities to collaborate with others. And in so doing, I can inadvertently put distance between myself and my clients, or myself and my colleagues. You can see how this becomes a downward spiral. This is me pulling an all-nighter. Let's go a little further. Brown calls this kind of behavior armored leadership. When I'm operating from fear, I can start to dangerously trend towards perfectionism. I can project my fear of failure on others. I act like a know-it-all instead of a curious and trusting collaborator. I try to exert my control. And this last one gets dangerously reinforced all over the place. This idea that exhaustion is a status symbol and we reward it. When people say, "How are you?" and you say, "I'm so busy," right? That's not an answer. So instead of the scary monster with the armor in the past picture, we want to think more about this powerful yogi and warrior pose. Brown says that if we can embrace our vulnerability, that humanness, and show our flaws, we can move into daring leadership. For me, that means moving out of that unattainable perfectionism and into something that looks more like modeling and encouraging healthy striving. From a fear of failure into practicing self-compassion and empathy with myself and others. From being right to being curious. From seeking compliance to cultivating commitment and shared purpose. From rewarding exhaustion as a status symbol and attaching productivity to self-worth to modeling and supporting rest, play, and recovery. Believe me, this is a practice, and your leadership style can be learned. And if this resonates you and you want to learn more about how to practice daring leadership, I commend you to Brown's site, daretolead.brenébrown.com. Read her book. It's the summary of 3 or 4 past books. There are activities and workbooks for all of her books, including this one, and tons of activities and examples for individuals and teams. I am not a certified Daring to Lead facilitator. They actually exist, but I did want to give you real examples today and not just ideas. So if you like this and want more, read her book and explore her site. To summarize, Brown says you can't get to courage without rumbling with vulnerability. Braving trust, like we talked about last week, is an essential piece of teamwork, building and cultivating trust. That idea that psychological safety on teams is an essential quality to their success. And living into your values, as a change-seeking organizations, our work is rooted in values. What are your organization's values? What are your personal values? What behaviors demonstrate those values? And this last idea that learning to rise is leadership that operationalizes that vulnerability, that trust, and those values. So to get to this place where you're daring to lead and living into your values, this kind of conscious leadership style takes self-love and self-awareness, Brown tells us. And self-awareness is having an accurate view of your skills, your abilities, and your shortcomings. It starts by knowing yourself and loving all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's our blind spots, the difference between how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you, and our biases that hinder our performance as individuals and teams. Blind spots and biases lead to assumptions and overconfidence. How accurate is your self-reflection? You may know this parable of the blind men and the elephant. 6 villagers went to observe an elephant, and all of them were blinded or blindfolded. One said, "It's a pillar," the person who touched the leg. Another said, "No, it's a rope," the person who touched the tail. Somebody who touched the tusk said, "I think it's a spear." Everybody begins to argue. Everybody thinks they're right. And admittedly, each feels a different part and comes to a different conclusion. And so it follows in the end, really, that each person is right to an extent. And our reality is like the elephant in this parable. Everyone observes parts of it. And we all have blind spots and biases that prevent us from seeing the whole picture. And the problem with blind spots is that you don't know what you don't know. That's why others can see aspects of yourself that you are missing. And that's why to get the whole picture of who you are, you need to consider other people's perspectives, not just yours. To get the whole picture, you need the perspective of others. And so there are all kinds of self-assessments out there that can help us get at that understanding and awareness. Some are done in groups, some by yourself, some are administered by a coach or an HR professional, some are, and believe me, there are plenty that are free on the internet. Preparing for this lesson alerted me to that. And you can use them to start to understand yourself better, your strengths, your challenges, your biases, your blind spots. Myers-Briggs is a famous one and that evaluates your preferences, and it's usually administered by a counselor or a coach. There's the Strength Finders book. Brown has a Daring to Lead assessment that walks you through those 4 categories of how armored or how daring your leadership style is. A MAP assessment, motivational assessment of personal potential, looks at specifically the job types that are good for your personality. Business schools often use a color test. You answer a series of 20 questions that diagnose you, I guess is the verb, as a certain color, which means you communicate in a certain way and have certain preferences, and how to communicate with other color types in your group. Sorry. There are also evaluations you can do to understand organizational strengths and opportunities, and look at your gender bias, look at how you approach racial diversity and inclusion, many types of assessments. And a quick Google search will help you wade through. But here's a specific one that we can quickly do ourselves with our own groups of people. You can do this with colleagues. You can do this with, expand it to friends and family as well. Write down 3 characteristics that you use to describe yourself. You can ask a group of people, like I said, at work or at home or both, to write down 3 words they would use to describe you. Compare all those answers collected. Where are they similar? Where are the discrepancies? And taking that a bit further, there's an exercise known as Johari's window, where it's the same interaction. You rate yourself and others evaluate you based on a set list of 50 or so words. The words that you pick and that are picked by others are put in that top left corner called the arena, or your open self. Those are things that you would use to describe about yourself and words others would use to describe you. The top right and bottom left corner are the places where you've picked some words and the group has picked other words. It lands in the top right corner if it's something that's only picked by people known to others but not yourself. So that would be your blind spot or your blind self, what others know about you but you don't. The bottom left is what you know about yourself but others don't. They call that the facade or the hidden self. And then the bottom right corner is the unknown quadrant, the words that weren't picked from that list. They're not known to you or the others. And the thing about this this exercise is that it's a snapshot. It's not meant to be rooted in stone. You can decrease your blind spot by increasing your arena. You can increase your arena by decreasing your facade, etc. Though you can really work on those areas and change the way those inner lines move. And this is an exercise that's perhaps less of a self-assessment, but a great exercise to both understand yourself and understand how what motivates you in a team, and maybe also allows you to express what you need from a team. I like this one because it's visual, and it's similar in that it's the 4 squares, and it's flexible in that the questions you ask can be changed for different purposes. But you give each person a piece of paper and some markers. You ask them to draw and not write their responses to each of the 4 questions in one quadrant. Give them a couple minutes to work individually and draw, and then regroup and give folks a couple minutes each to present their drawing. You can change the questions, as I said. One can be an assessment like we talked about last week, where you talk about what you bring to the group, what you need from the group, something personal about yourself, like a hobby or an event that has fundamentally shaped you. You can put your vision for the group, and that allows you to go around the room and both and have in this informal way a conversation about kind of what brings you to the work that you're doing together, what motivates you, what turns you off, etc. And there are dozens of questions you could use in this kind of format. It's slightly self-assessment and slightly team building. And then finally, we've talked about conscious and courageous leadership as one that's based on values. Another self-assessment that you can do is identify 2 immutable core values, and really just honing in on 2, I think, drives you to really think about kind of not just a suite of ideas that you aspire to, but when the going gets tough, what's that filter that you really use to guide your work? And in picking the 2, think about, does this define me? Is this who I am at my best? Is this a filter I use to make hard decisions? And then for each of the 2, write down 3 behaviors that support your value. Write down 3 behaviors that pull you away from that value. And then illustrate for yourself, what does fully living into this value look like for you? This values exercise can really anchor you in courageous leadership. A list of values is offered on Dare to Lead, or you could work from your own list. It takes you from this lip service about being in values-driven work and really, truly practicing it. So in summary, we talked about the idea of practicing vulnerability as a way to develop courageous leadership, that identifying your core values allows you to lead more consciously, and that self-assessments help to diminish your biases and your blind spots by becoming more aware of yourself and your surroundings. So thank you for your time here in the lesson part of this bootcamp series. We're gonna, Andrew's gonna take us into the Zoom part of the meeting, the office hours. where we'll really get into talking about maybe an assessment that you've done for yourself or your organization, why it worked and where it didn't, and any other questions that you have about this presentation. Finally, I wanted to give a plug for our last session of the series, where we'll really get operational, talking about how to run meetings, how to take and give feedback, technologies that you use to foster productivity. So really that brass tacks element of working in teams successfully. I hope you can join us. Thank you.